Now, my top six were incredibly hard for me to choose between, and I think possibly of all of them, Maxwell Plantation had the best holes out of all of them. Certainly, there are some of these that I think are like single-handedly top five holes in the game, and there was a level of real challenge and feeling like you were on a bit of a knife edge with this course the whole time. You kind of always had to execute, particularly on some of the holes by the creeks. I'm going to delve into a few of those a little bit more as well. Also, there was some really cool planting that Petty later refined even further with that brown grass. And there was certainly some controversial holes. I thought about featuring 13, but possibly a little bit too harsh for some people. That said, this one really made an impression in the World Cup and honestly was unlucky not to get further than it did. It's a really class course and well worth a replay if you haven't done recently. For my money, this course has the best short par fours in the game, and that began at the third hole, where your line of charm was down the left, which was where the greatest danger was, and a fairway deciding to try to kick you that way as much as possible. So it was really risk reward of how much you thought you could get away with in order to try and get down that side. The green opened up the further left you went, but it still wasn't ever forgiving, and you never really felt safe on this hole until your ball was at the bottom of the cup. It was a really good hole to start off with. The second short par 4 we're looking at is the 11th, which again featured that creek cutting through the hole directly this time. And again, the mounding made it challenging. You wanted to be kind of down the centre. You could potentially try to cross the river, or you could lay up on the left-hand side. And it really depended on what you fancied and where you wanted your challenge. The green itself offered you different ways of getting at the pin too, and really complicated matters. It was a real thinker's hole. There's an all-time favourite Seamount clip on this hole where he rage quit after hitting it into the water multiple times, but it was a devilishly simple hole that just featured a very tricky green and some awkwardly placed water. You could drive this one or get close, but you did not want to be beyond the pin at all, or you'd run the risk of running back into the water. This is one where discretion is the better part of value. Lay up. The final course I'm picking from the World Cup of Design was Energizers Ruins of Spaghetti, and this one stood out to me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it did a lot of things differently to others in that contest. It was unashamedly difficult, but also wide, so you could try to score. It was just challenging. It also was a fantasy style course, and those typically don't do so well in contests that we run. It tends to be more the realistic type of course. Um, it used a ton of the objects in really creative ways and just had a great plot that was, again, a load of fun to go around. And you found yourself in different places at different points. And it was just really enjoyable to play over and over again. Ultimately, this one finished second in that contest, but it was the one that probably stuck with me the most out of that group. If nothing else, just it's totally different to anything else that you'll play. The first hole we're featuring is one after my own heart, with a dogleg left where you want to be hugging the left-hand side the entire way down. Plays along the cliff edge, so you want to be playing close to those bunkers in order to open up and shot that green, which was divided from the fairway by a kind of rocky expanse that you wanted to steer as close to as possible. You could bounce the ball onto the green as ever, and there was ample short grass around it. You could really get yourself in trouble on this one, as well as being able to bounce it down in from the right-hand side of the green. It was just a load of fun to play. So many of the green complexes on this course stood out, but the one at 7 was possibly my favourite. So here you had a short par 4 where you could drive just over the crest of the hill, and you chose what sort of club you wanted to leave in. And then you had this green with a mound in the front, a swale before the green, and run off at the back, and you had to work out just how to end up getting the ball kind of close. And it was one that you could play multiple different times in multiple different ways and not get bored of. Now, all of the par 3s on this course were really good, but he definitely saved the best till last with the 17th, which played just in the shadow of the cliffs. And you had a shot where you wanted to hug as close left as possible to those bunkers in order not to run off. And with the elevation change, it was really difficult to work out what was the best club to hit. Ultimately, though, setting for this one was just stellar. It's entirely possible that people missed a lot of the great off-course work here, so I thought I'd show off some of it. It's probably one of the most creative courses that we've seen come out in the game, and often these sorts of set pieces can detract from the overall golf, but here it really enhanced it. At the end of the day, it's a fantastic golf course that happens to have an amazing setting rather than an amazing setting with an average golf course. And that's always the way around it should be. In at number 4, and it is Burlingame by Pithy Dr. G. Now, I mentioned yesterday how creating a CC basic level course that's still interesting is one of the most challenging things that you can do in the designer. I would argue that harder still is creating a really tough test for the best players in the game, but have that somehow be something that people want to keep coming back and playing. And Dan really pulled it off with this one. The aesthetic is great. The spacing, ambience, tournament atmosphere was absolutely perfect. But really, it was the fact that you kept wanting to come back and play these holes and do better that made this the perfect challenge and a worthy winner of that contest. Now, there's a number of great holes on here, but we're just going to feature a few of them. Again, well worth giving it another play. And there's a members version as well if you don't fancy the full level of challenge with this one. The first hole immediately grabs your attention, and not just because it's 520 odd yards long. You have these giant cypress trees that act as sentinels the entire way of the fairway, and then you have this green in the distance with a beautiful city backdrop that just frames the hole wonderfully. Additionally, you could always work the ball on. I think this was sort of inspired by LACC. It was a really interesting golf hole. It's often hard to love 200 plus yard par threes, but the third hole is a great example of one done well. The green's just sitting propped up by some big, bold bunkers, but there were slopes to gather the ball if you happen to execute your shot well enough. Equally, you could always play for the middle of the green, and that would give you a decent look to 3 of the 4 pins. It was a really cool hole that sat nicely in the middle of this one's routing. 17 is my favourite hole on the course, and you might be forgiven for thinking that the giant fairway bunker is the main hazard on this one. Not so. After a drive that found its way to the top of the ridgeline in the fairway, you then face this approach shot to a green that's just perched above a ravine that ran down the right-hand side and featured predominantly across the back 9. The green had a load of bold slopes and did feed towards the back, so you could work your ball towards the pin, but it was always a really challenging and fraught approach shot. It wouldn't be a list of my favourite courses without an RJ Wills entry, and Kicking Horse makes it in at number 3. This one featured a plot by Ryan McConnell for the Dream Team contest, and it was a really wild, interesting plot that this course totally harnessed for some fascinating golf and some holes that were just things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. The creek ran through it and was used pretty well, but the star of the show was really the land movement and the way in which he masters the elevation change and found some really interesting green sites throughout. So we're going to dig into this one a little bit more. If you haven't played in a while, this is a must play, drop everything and go do it. Rob excels at making par 5s, particularly with the second shots, and the 8th was probably the pick of the bunch for me. One of those holes that you get halfway down and wonder where you could possibly be going. Your drive threads these bunkers, which sets up a second shot, either over the big sandy waste or the second big sandy waste, and then you see the green off in the distance and realise that's where you're going. You can reach it in 2 if you get very lucky, but it requires a big bold shot and a bounce to get up there as well. The green was quite small, but perched beautifully up on a hillside, and this is one of those utter one-of-a-kind holes that you'll never see anywhere else, and we probably just shouldn't attempt remaking. As good as the 8th is, it's the 12th that is my favourite hole in the entire game that has been created. You play from the top of the hill, and you work down to this really wide fairway, which is crowned in the middle, so the ball's going to bounce every which way. You choose your path, but then you get more choices with 2 separate greens that both kind of fit. One is up top and high and perched, requiring an aerial approach. The second down low, requiring more of a running approach and some really interesting bunkering. This is one of those holes that is just absolutely perfect, and I wouldn't change for the world. It's also going to be one that's definitely inspiring me at some point in the future, whenever you find that point that just kind of works for them. The 17th was the pick of the par 3s from me, going from high point to high point and a load of bunkering just drawing your eye from this green, which was perched right on the top of the hill. Couldn't be too long, couldn't be too short, and club selection was absolutely vital. This then set you up for a rip-roaring 18th back down towards the creek and the clubhouse. My second highest ranked course of 2K23, and it's Shoreham Island Club by Grovey. For me, this is the best groovy course we've ever had. It marries a really good environment with just some outstanding golf as ever. Really interesting green complexes, cool planting. Um, as you can see, the plot is to die for and just executes everything at an exceedingly high level. This one has replayability in bunches. It also fits that beautiful mold of it's not too difficult, it's not too easy, it's still got all the strategy you could be wanting to look for. But as mentioned, it's the environment that separates this from some of his others for me. Not that those are bad, but this is the one where it's somewhere you really want to play golf. And you can see the planting is a definite step up from a lot of his other courses. Now, this one, he leaned into some more of the templates than previously, and those paid off really well with some very interesting golf holes and strategy throughout. So, yeah, give this one a play. The first hole we're looking at is the fifth, which is a mid length par 4 and works its way between a couple of dunes. I always loved this one for the sight line. You had a house to the left, that lighthouse beautifully on the right, and this green just propped up in the middle. The green itself has a little bit of a false front and a back tier, so you wanted to be precise with your approach. But for me, this one just harnesses. I had a wonderful moment playing this course where it was just like, yeah, this is absolutely perfect. And you don't get that all that often. Shoreham features the best par threes I think he's produced, and the ninth is the pick of those. It just sits beautifully into this dunescape with one big mound short left that I'd have probably knocked down but works so nicely. The green itself, an Eden, funnels hard from back to front, meaning that you want to be below the hole wherever possible, which is challenging when the winds are swirling. Just a really good hole and a great execution of a timeless classic. There are so many of the par fours that I could have picked from this course, but the 11th really stands out. Partly, yeah, I'm a sucker for coastline, partly, I'm a sucker for Alps and blind shots. But this one, if you headed over to the right, you had an obscure approach. If you took on the greater challenge on the left, it opened up. And then you got the approach into a really cool punch bowl green with multiple little folds and ways to direct the ball. Quite a big green, but there were loads of ways to get the ball close, which for me produces that variety and makes you want to keep coming back. Just an awesome spin on a real classic. My favourite course of the entirety of PGA 2K23 was PS Petty's Font la Reine, which I'm sure is exactly how he says it. This one was a really novel take on a heathland course. From the plot and the brief, it was kind of based on the continent, which made him come up with perhaps a really interesting take on heather, and the planting lifted this one no end. However, whereas Maxwell Plantation, a little further down this list, had some excellent holes, this one was back to back to back great. There's very little, if anything, that you would change on this course. And it had some really interesting takes on kind of natural holes using some funky land in places, such as this one on the 6th, I think. However, it wove its way through out the trees really nicely, has a load of stellar holes, and yeah, I think would be a number of people's pick for the best course in this game. It's a really stunning course, beautifully planted, beautifully designed, and yeah, definitely worth multiple replays just to enjoy approaches like this one into 10. I could talk about every single hole on this course. It's one of my favourites I've ever played, but we're just going to have to settle for 3 of them. Enjoy. The 5th hole's first on my list, and this one plays from a low point on the property over a heathery expanse with a couple of bunkers cut in. You play over the ridgeline, and then the green reveals itself amongst a sandy waste area, which I thought fitted really nicely. The green itself was the primary source of interest and defence, with a real fall off on the right hand side, a front pocket, and a back shelf, and just tons of interesting stuff going on there. It's just a very natural hole and one that you wouldn't have created in any other way than finding it. As ever with petty courses, you've got a number of classy short par 4s, such as the 8th that you've just seen over the right hand side, but a favourite of mine was the 9th, where you laid up to a fairway, you would run out with a driver, and positioned yourself in amongst that cluster of bunkers to best attack this green, again over a heathery waste area. Here the green rolled kind of front to back, which is a bit of a precursor to 18 that you see later, and there were a number of folds and some really cool bunkering in and around it. Just felt very grand and just a really good closing hole on the front nine. As good as 9 was, 18 was better still, and you had this tiny little bunker cut in to give you a bit of an aiming line. Here you were playing over this ridge to a bumpy fairway that rolled the ball down, and that set up your second shot, which was really kind of all or nothing. Or you laid up and then chipped over that heather, but most people were going for it. If you did clear it, everything rolled towards the green, so the ball would funnel on towards pins, with this one, pin 1, if you want to play it, being the most fun and easiest accessible. It was a really good end to the round and offered a great heroic shot to finish up. So as mentioned at the start, this is very much my own personal list of preferences for those courses that I enjoyed the most in 2K23 so far. Obviously, we're hoping on a new game relatively soon, and I've no doubt that that will lead to even better courses coming out as people are getting better all the time. But if you were looking for some courses to replay before that happens, this would be a really good list to start from, I think. Let me know what you think, whether I messed up, got it right or wrong, and what you'd have had at number 1. See you again soon.